Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 6, and this is session 12. In our previous session, we stopped looking at verse 32. Let me just show you the verse. It's what we were just talking about before the prayer to get started here. He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? And in order to understand the verse properly, as we're looking at this, we went through the material about what we needed to be thinking about when it says, God spared not His own Son. And this question that's going to be asked is all within the context that we've been in for a while now in Romans chapter 8. So, when it comes to this first phrase, He that spared not His own Son, two things have to be in our thinking. Let me give them to you right here on the PowerPoint. First of all, God's motivation for sparing not His own Son was charity. I'm not going to call it godly love and charity this time because it's His, right? Any kind He has is that kind. And so that, by the way, I'm not just giving you something here. Sometimes I get so involved in if this makes sense, I get so involved in trying to teach the material that I kind of get away from just talking to you about it. And I don't want to do that. So let me take just a moment and look at the difference here. God has a motivation for not sparing His own Son, and God has a purpose for not sparing His own Son. His purpose was so that He could have sons and daughters labor with Him through the ages to come. That's a privilege. And it's not just a privilege, but if I can take it back to something else, when God created man and had a plan and purpose, look, I see these signs around all the time on church billboards. God has a plan for your life. But normally when you see that on a church billboard, they think God has a certain thing He wants you to do. He has a certain job He wants you to work, a certain person He wants you to marry, a certain church He wants you to attend. Those are all sonship decisions. Those are not, God doesn't have that planned out. And I went through that as a young preacher because I went to school and I hear people talk about, I'm going to get married and I know I'm marrying God's will. And that was always a difficult thing for me because I thought, how do you know which one out of all the people in the world, how do you know who He's picking? Well, okay, a discussion, huh?
That's a very devious plan of Satan.
It is a devious plan of Satan to get you... That's right. That's right. It's redefining what all that is. God does have a plan for you, but you know what His plan is? His plan is not the individualized things of what we're going to do today, that we're supposed to do those things out of what we understand about His wisdom installed in us. His plan is that we would labor with Him. And He's going to educate us to do that. So that's His purpose. But look, and so His motivation, though, for doing that is because He loves us. In other words, why did God create us? So that we could be His sons and daughters in a close relationship. By the way, is that so foreign to any parent? That you want to have a relationship with your children? God wants to have a relationship with His creation. And the reason, the motivation for that is because He loves us. Now that really is it. So, having said that, those are the two things that have to come in our mind when it says, God spared not His own Son. He spared Him for a purpose, and that's so that we could labor with Him. And the reason behind, the motivation for all that is because He loves us. He is not a farmer in the 40s who needs 8 kids so he can have farm hands. I mean, I understand that. My mom was the oldest of 10 kids and they worked on a farm. But God's not raising farm hands. Not anything wrong with a farm, by the way. I'm not saying that. Somebody will email me now about why I'm against the farmers. But look, here's what I'm saying. He's doing this because I'm not even going to act like I heard that. Heard what? He's doing that because what He is offering us in laboring with Him is the very pinnacle of what it would mean to actually be in existence, to have that kind of life with Him. It's not, I'm doing this just because I got to have you and I got some work for you to do. He could do everything He wants to do on His own. But He's not just willing to share let us share in the privilege of laboring with Him, but the privilege of what it takes to be able to labor with Him is going to be freely given to us. We're going to have to be educated and edified unto godliness, and that's going to turn us into something that's going to make our existence way more than just being alive in the world. Okay, anyway, I could get too far off on that. So, when you look at that purpose, that's what He wants to do. He wants us to, yes, labor with Him now, but it doesn't end in the here and now. It's also going to be out there. And I thought about this, so I need to say it this way. Whom He did foreknow, and we know that before the foundation of the world, He had this whole thing in His mind. He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, because that's going to be the end result of this thing. Remember, we talked about that. But here's what God does. He planned this whole thing out, every part of it, before it ever got started. And I thought about how He does it in comparison to how I do it. If I have a project I'm doing, I can't tell you how many times in the middle of that project I go, oh, you know what? I didn't take this into account. I should have thought about this was going to happen. Why didn't I think about that? And then, you know what happens in the middle of my plan? The plan changes, because now I have to accommodate that. But sometimes I can't accommodate it perfectly because I've gone so far in the plan that actually now something else is, if I change it now, that alters something else. All right, you know what I'm saying. I don't have to say any more about that. God is not that way. No, He has no plan B. Because His plan A didn't overlook anything, it didn't leave anything out, and it took everything into account. So when He was back here, here's what He had. He had a purpose to have sons and daughters labor with Him. And He had a plan. And that plan, that marker is going out on me, that plan had to have significant parts to it. I'm only going to talk about two, because this is exactly what we're about to get into in this next phrase in verse 32. The first thing in this plan is, in order for us to be conformed to the image of His Son, to be able to be the sons who are laboring with Him out there, in order for that to happen, He had to do some things before the whole thing started. If you're going to have a business and you're going to hire people, wouldn't it be a good thing to have a place where the business is going to be? I don't know if it was a commercial or something was on TV, and this girl was at odds with her mom over, the way she looked at life and the way her mom looked at life. And she goes, Mom, you're just old-fashioned. You know what? And what she wants to do is she wants to adopt this baby. And she goes, just because I don't have a husband and I don't have a car and I don't have a job and I don't have a home, I just want one thing you want, and that's to have this baby. And just because I don't have those other things, you don't think I can do that. And her mother went, I really wish you could hear what you're saying. You don't have, I mean, what are you going to bring it into, right? I mean, it's the whole point. Anyway, I don't remember where I saw that. God had to, God had to do some things to ensure that we were actually going to be able to get out there and become what He wanted us to be. And He had to do those things beforehand. And then the second thing He had to do, you know what, I may actually have this on a PowerPoint. Let me just look at this here. All right, so let me just do this. The first thing He had to do is He had to make us spiritually fit. Because He can't just plug you in to a place in the heavenly places in your old, unregenerated condition. Because you can't function out there. Okay, look, I'm just going to admit something right here, because this is the reason I'm being so halting about this. I thought of a number of different things to say in connection with what we're looking at right here that I thought would not only help clarify this issue, but would bring some thoughts to our mind that we don't normally think about. Everything that God did to make us spiritually fit, and that is our justification and our sanctification, He gave us that as a free gift of grace. And here's the thing I want to just remind you about whenever God gives us something by His grace. When people, most of the time, I would say this is probably true for all of us, what people give you on your birthday or at Christmas or on your anniversary or any other day, when people give you a gift, it is usually a token of either their affection or their friendship or their love for you. Most of the time, what people give you is not something you couldn't go and could have gone and gotten for yourself. Most of the time. There may be a couple of things that you have gotten that you have said, wow, I could have never gotten that myself. But those are pretty rare, right? So most of the time, people, they're just expressing their friendship. They're not trying to give you, a planet. They're just, all right. But when your Father gives you something, He is never giving you anything that you could go out and get on your own. You don't have the capacity. There is nothing He has given you by grace that you could go out and get on your own. Nothing. And if you tried, it would never accomplish what His gift of grace would accomplish. Just look at justification. There are plenty of people who try to save themselves by their own good works and the performance of religious ritual. Are any of them going to heaven based on that? The answer is no. Now you can try, but it will never be sufficient. So when this thought came to me, I thought, you know what, it's not in the notes, but I just need to remember to say it because that helps clue you in on something else. God isn't giving you anything that you could go out and do on your own. And when you think about that, hey, Billy had cataract surgery. Guess what? We found a doctor that does that. She went and got it. We could have prayed until the stars fell down. God's not doing that. You know why? He's not going to give you what you can do. He's giving you what you absolutely have to have. You have to have it. And you can't get it on your own. That's the kind of gift He's given. Just saying, when He's talking about your grace. All right. The second thing in addition to that is He has to give us a means by which we are educated in our Father's business. And He has given us that means by giving us the Spirit who dwells within us and the Word of God. And those are the means by which we get educated. And then He has to give, then there has to be I'm just going to call it this, but these are not the way the Bible's describing it. I'm just talking about it this way. A process that takes that education and turns it into edification. That it's actually now transforming who we are from the inside out. It's not just us acting that way, it's that we're really becoming that. We're actually being transformed. And all of those issues of spiritual fitness, education, and edification, those are things he had to line out ahead of time in order for us to one day labor with him in his business. That all had to be in place. And we know from Galatians that that's exactly what everything he did was about. You know this verse. God's purpose in not sparing his son is so that we could labor with him. His motivation is because of his charity. I showed you that, but here's the Galatians 4. And when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his son, made of a woman, made under the law. That sounds like something he planned, doesn't it? When the fullness of the time was come. He says, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. In other words, the whole reason that he sent his son is to say the cross is not the end, it's a means to an end. The cross, folks, is what made... Look, here's the cross. That's the issue of spiritual fitness. Here's the word. That's the issue of your education. And when the Spirit takes that word and it effectually works to transform your inner man, that's edification. All of those things that he did were part of the process to get us to an end purpose. I'm just saying it that way because all of those years that I was in church, it was always like the cross and getting saved was the big issue. It was the end issue. Once you got that, the only thing you were doing then is just stop sinning until the rapture comes. That's it. But now you understand that was part of what he had to do in order to accomplish this purpose of enabling us to labor with him. And that is what he is after. And so, here's how important this issue is. Well, let me just say it to you like this. In fact, let me just see if I've got this other verse. Before I do that, let me give you this. The reason God spared not his own son was to provide for sons who are fully equipped and capable of laboring with him in his business. That's why in other words, if you got this verse, the whole reason that God sent forth his son was so that we might receive the adoption of sons. That's what he had in mind. That was part of what he had to do in order to bring this purpose to pass. And so by doing that, by the cross, we are made spiritually fit. We're given a justification and a sanctification. We have his word, and that word got completed because remember at the start of this dispensation of grace, he used spiritual gifts to edify those groups because they didn't have a completed revelation of Scripture. But then we got the more excellent way. And so that Spirit that dwells within us and that word that we can actually hold in our hands and look at, the Spirit can take that word and transform us by that so that we start thinking about things entirely different. Thinking about them the way our Father thinks about them. And so when I talked about those two things, about his purpose and his motivation for that, godly charity, that charity is so important. Because if whatever we're going to do in laboring with him, if we don't do it out of that, as Corinthians said, we're going to be a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. It's going to profit us nothing. All of that is going to be, because that's not how your Father does it. Your Father always does it that way. Therefore, when we get to the education, that's the first issue that we get taught about. We get all those aspects of godly love and charity over there, beginning in Romans chapter 12 and verse 3. Secondly, as far as the Spirit goes, that is the most important ministry of the Spirit, is to produce those components of godly charity in us. So it's not only the first thing that we get in the education, It's the most important ministry that the Spirit has with us. And I really cannot overemphasize that. So from start to finish in this education is the thing that we start with, and we don't go off and leave it in the dust and go on to other things. We carry that with us all the way through to the end, so that our love, it doesn't just get generated, but it increases and it abounds. And that's where He wants this to go. And at no time in our education are we going to leave that godly love and charity behind, or leave it out of the decision-making process. It's always got to be there. Now, I'm saying that. It is hard for us to remember every single thing that gets said. I stand up here and flap my gums, and I say a bunch of stuff, and it's impossible to remember every single thing that I'm saying. But I do want you to get this part, that it is not only the first thing that we encounter, it's the most important ministry that the Spirit has to produce in us, but this will permeate it is the very fabric of our education from the start to the finish. Karen?
Okay, you opened the door. When we were studying this before, it was godly love.
Mm-hmm.
And the love taught us the wisdom and the other decision-making skills. Under love would be the subcategory charity, because of the mercy and grace He gave us.
Let me think about that.
Because it's really not a subcategory, it's a category on itself. It's all entailed under godly love. Right?
I need to think about that before I answer your question.
Charity can only be produced through love, isn't it?
Yes. When 1 Corinthians talks about that, it uses the word charity. The way we got taught that in the old days is to say charity means love. And then people kind of jump through these hoops to say, and you have different kinds of love. And so they went, and we did this, so we're not going to redo it, but they talked about agape, phileo, storge, eros. This is a romantic type love. This is family love. This is friendship love. This is supposedly God's love. And I went through an exercise with you in the past. It's been years ago, but I showed you how when you talk about these two right here, you can't go back to the Greek and try to figure out what the verse is saying based on that, because there are verses that talks about the Father and love the Son, and it's phileo, and then there's something else that you would look at, and it's agape, and those things get switched up so often. That's not how you can formulate that. So let me think about that, and maybe after the break I'll answer that. But
Would it be like charity is just an action word?
well, there is something to that, because we define that word charity. Charity is that you value and esteem someone else more than yourselves, so that you are willing to do what is best for them, even to your own detriment. Now, if you said to me, I'm just talking as I'm thinking about it here, how is that different from godly love? I don't know that it is different. I think that is godly love. But maybe it's a furtherance of, that's why I need to think about that.
The love is what sent His Son to the cross. The love of us. The charity was the grace and mercy He's given us. Is the way I had first understood it.
Okay. Well, let me think about that before I answer that, because I won't say it right. Okay. All right. So, here's what I do know that charity involves. And I don't know if I have this on the PowerPoint or not. No. Okay. So, charity involves the issues of godliness. If you're going to have godly charity, then here's what is there anybody in this room that knows what the 3 issues of godliness are? Of course, you could do them in your sleep. So, it is thinking about it the way your Father thinks about it, right? It is doing whatever you're going to do. It's doing it His way, for His reasons, okay? In other words, charity is producing the issues of godliness in us. The education is geared toward that, but it has to go from here to here. So it's got to move from here to where now you have really come to a change of mind about how I see things and how I'm going to respond to those things. That's what edification is geared to do. Now, to bring that back to verse 32, God loved us, and by the way, I'm going to say this is going to sound really strange, but what's that? Let me back up to this verse. He that spared not his own son. I'm actually going to get into this more when we get to this next phrase. If He spared not His own son, because the purpose was not just for you to be saved, but the purpose was for you to be given the privilege of laboring with Him. Not because He's upset with you and He just wants to make you do work, but because the work you're going to get to engage in is something you have to be worthy to engage in. And He has to do that, by the way. And I'm going to get ahead of myself. I knew good and well I was going to do that. So let me stop saying that way. What have I got left here? And let me do it this way. God wanted sons to labor with Him, and we know that. And so, in order to make that happen, He spared not His own Son. And Jesus took on the sin of the world. And why did He do that? So that we would be given the opportunity to work side by side with Jesus Christ in our Father's business. That makes sense? And I remember, and I use the word opportunity because God's not going to make anybody do that. He's not going to force anybody to do that. So He spares not His own Son, because if Jesus doesn't do what He does in His death, burial, and resurrection, how many sons can there be? None. None. So He spares not His own Son. Does He love us? Yes. But don't think about it like, oh, I just look down there and they're just so cute and cuddly and I just love them and I'm just going to send my son. That you're acting like that's the whole end result is you were just so lovable He couldn't help but do that. And that's not it. The thing that He loves, the thing that He values and esteems, is what we will become as His sons and daughters. That's what He's after. He's not after a halfway measure. So yeah, there's a whole lot of other things, and I gave you a whole bunch of things. In fact, I gave you a list of them in your notes. But when I got to this point, instead of belaboring all of that, you can read all of that on your own. He spared not His own Son so that we would have the opportunity to labor with His Son in His business. So you know what group He really has in mind? Now I got to say this before this ends. Okay, it's almost going to go off. I'm just going to stop it. I'm going to say it this way to end this session, because this is what we got to have in our mind. When God is looking at His purpose, His eternal purpose, I'm going to do something in eternity, and I am going to create these beings, and I am going to give them this wonderful, glorious opportunity to engage with me in my creation. I'm going to allow part of my creation to actually work within the creation on my behalf. And it's going to be a glorious thing for them. Look, in eternity, you will never get up one day and go, ugh, here we go again. Okay. You can hold me to that. You're never gonna go, same old thing, what is driving me nuts. It won't be that way. But your Father is looking at that and saying, I'm going to give you the opportunity to engage in this with me. I don't want to lose this point, but the group that He has in mind, if I could take all of this through, this group right here, let's do it like this. That's the group that He's looking at. Let me ask you this question. How many of His, if I call them sons, you'll X Israel's program out. So I don't care if you're talking about Israel's program or the dispensation of grace. How many in Israel's program, how many would God love to have labor with Him on the earth? Every single one of them. And how many in the dispensation of grace would God love to have labor with Him in eternity, in the heavens? Okay. God isn't looking at a subgroup. Does He know not everybody will be saved?
Yes.
And does He know of those that are saved, not all of those are going to care about being sons? And it's probably because no one's really explained to them, really and truly, if you had I don't know if that's true. I'm about to say something, I don't know if it's true. But I want to say, if people really understood what was being offered to them here, I don't know how anyone would turn that down. But I suppose maybe people always surprise me, so maybe there would be some. But
There's no exposure.
There's
just no exposure.
it's like they don't know about it, or there's components of it they don't understand. I remember explaining this to someone. Mark was with me when I was doing this, and when I got to the end, when I was explaining that to the best of my ability, and they said this, well, maybe God doesn't want everybody to labor with Him. And I thought, then I haven't explained well enough what it means to labor with Him. Because why would He not want everyone to do that? You know what you'd have then? Then you would have elitism, wouldn't you? Okay, some of y'all need to be nobodies and other of you need to be big shots. That's not what God is doing. He is giving us all the opportunity. You know why? Because it's all by grace. There's nothing intrinsic about any of us. God doesn't look at one person and go, oh, you went to MIT? Oh, I need you to be a big shot up there in the heavens with me. That doesn't matter to Him. He's looking at a heart, by the way, He's looking at a heart issue. That's what I was going to say about that. But this whole thing has this group in mind. Now, I'm going to come back and talk about this more because we need to have this in our mind. You're going to use this online. I know you are, but I'm going to say it this way. God is not looking at, this is the process from start to finish. And this is sons and daughters over here that are capable and equipped to labor with their Father in His business. And here's where you first get saved. This is salvation right here. Along this process that God wants to take you from here to being brought unto a perfect man, or to have conformed you to the image of His Son. Any of that terminology you want to use. If someone says, okay, here's what I want. Here I am in the process. And this is where I stop right here. I'm not going any further. Because you know what? Here's what this person is saying. I don't want to go to hell. So yes, I will take your offer of salvation. But to actually do what you created me to do, and to offer me what you really, out of your love, are offering me. No, because you know what? I got my own thing going here.
Comfort zone.
I don't want to go any further. All right, look, I am going to expand on this. You just have to put up with it in the second session, but I just got to end it this way. I'm not saying God gets all tore up about it like we do, but let's say it like this. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you have ideas about how you think you would like for people in the world to conduct themselves. There is ungodly and evil behavior in this world that we don't want to be a part of. And here's where I'm going, and we don't want our children to be a part of. We would like for them to look at our own values and understand that those have some worth. How do parents feel when their kids reject all of the things that they stand for, so to speak, and go off on a totally different way? Hey, they're your children, so are you brokenhearted? You love them and you wish they wouldn't do that? Huh?
Long-suffering and prayer.
Okay, well, so they go off on this different tangent, and they reject all the things that really anchor you. How do you, look, even though you love them, don't you feel a little bit betrayed? I'm not saying you look at them like Benedict Arnold, but you're thinking, you know what? You got raised up in this home, and you never saw these kinds of things modeled anywhere in this home. But either at school or at work or somewhere, you got in with a group of people, or you know what? You watched enough of the wrong television programs that you got this idea in your head that this is really how you live your life, and you have the moral compass of a tree squirrel, and you just think this, you know what? And human life has no value to me, and so this is how I'm going to live. And you look at that and you think, where did you get that? Just take that thought, that when your Father is offering you, what He's offering you is not in piecemeal. Hey, you want to miss hell? I'm offering you a chance to get to heaven. All right, now, those of you that took me up my other offer, I got another deal for you. How many of you want to go to work with me every day? No, I'm good, thank you. You know what our Father is really looking at? He's really looking at, look, when we don't make this, I'm just saying it this way, when we don't go through this process and continue through this process, you know what we're really saying? The values, the things that are important to our Father, the reason He created us, you know, I think I know better. I'm going to go a different way. Those values don't mean anything to me. That business He's got out there, not that big a deal to me. I'm willing to just go to heaven, but I don't want the full thing here. But when your Father is looking at it, His purpose is not just how many people can I get out of hell. That's the way we look at it, because we are very short-sighted biblically. The way He's looking at it is, how many sons and daughters can I have to labor with me? We almost look at that like, I don't mean we, but I mean people generally almost look at that like that's a bad thing. It's the greatest thing you could ever engage in. I know there are guys, I've heard them. I married a couple when I lived in Decatur and was coming down here on Sundays. I married a couple up in Decatur. Look, they had a kid that came over. His whole life revolved around fishing. His whole life. I mean, his whole life. Every day after work, he went fishing till it was too dark to fish. Every day on the weekends, he went fishing. His whole life was about fishing. And he said to me, when I talked to him over at their house one day about the Lord, he said, if there's not going to be bass fishing in heaven and we're not going to get to go, I'm not interested. Now, you know, okay, we're chuckling at that because you know what? That is so absolute absurd. But you know what that's really doing? That's really doing the exact same thing. Look, I guess I'm kind of making the point here. That's saying the thing that God thinks is important, that's not important to me. It's just like a parent watching their kids take all the things that are beneficial for them and then reject what they think is the important things of character. Yeah, give me the ticket so I can do what I want to do, but then I'm not going to live the way you live because I think that's out of step. By the way, that really is the way the world is going to go. By the time the tribulation is upon the world and this dispensation of grace is over, people will be lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That's what they're going to live for. That's what this whole course this world is working toward. I'm just asking us to consider that anywhere along this line when we do that, we know how, look, I just know it this way. I know how I feel as a parent. It gives me a little bit of an idea how my Heavenly Father feels as a parent. I have more to say about it. We'll stop. Take our break, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up this next phrase.